and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Caligeris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today, we have one of our most popular and most frequent guests on, Mark Stiving, renowned pricing expert, host of Impact Pricing, author of 4 top-selling pricing books, and the original creator of our own pricing course. So welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. There was no insult in that entire introduction.
I know.
Wow.
I'm going to see how far I can go. So everybody listening at home should be timing me. But this is the part where I usually ask everyone their origin story. But we've covered that. We all know, you were fascinated by numbers and prices that ended in 99 cents. And so I'm not going to ask you that. Instead, I want you to tell us, Mark, why a product manager or product marketer who listens to the show, who quote unquote doesn't own pricing, right? Why should they listen to this podcast about pricing?
Oh my gosh, are you serious?
I am.
So let's start off with the fact that you could think of pricing as, hey, I got to put a number on a product. And I would guess most product managers start out thinking that's what it is. But here's what happens is once you start saying, well, how much is somebody willing to pay me for something? And then you look, there's different people that are willing to pay different amounts. And there's different reasons why they're willing to pay you different amounts. And then you start to say, well, gee, if I build a product for that specific person who's willing to pay me a whole lot more, I could charge a whole lot more. And what's so fascinating to me is this concept of willingness to pay, or I turn that into value. How much value are we delivering to our customers? Should be driving almost every single decision a product manager makes.
Absolutely.
And yet, they don't really understand what does value actually mean to their customers. And what's fascinating is it's not I'm not going to blame product managers. I can tell you that product marketers don't know. And I can tell you that salespeople don't know. And so it's just fascinating to me that this most important piece of information that should be driving almost every business decision inside a company is a mystery. And so that's why they should be listening.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before. So I knew, but to me, people think of, like you said, pricing is the thing that happens at the end. But when we talk about it pragmatic, you should only build solutions for problems that are pervasive, urgent, and people are willing to pay for. And the only way you really know what someone's willingness to pay for is what we talk about with pricing, right? That is what we're studying. And so that just from a product manager's perspective, my go, no go, should I do this? I need to understand this. The second piece of that is you say willingness to pay is based on the value that the buyer perceives they're getting. And I, as a product marketer, my job is to communicate that value, to influence how much value they feel they're getting. So again, these kind of fundamental things. But when we think about pricing, we think of it as the price tag at the end. But these concepts that are, pricing concepts are so critical for both. So do not skip this episode is what we're saying. That is what we're saying, right?
Absolutely. And in fact, just for kicks, I want to amplify what you just said. As a marketing person, you have to focus on these big problems. Why is it that somebody should buy a product in my product category, right? And then you think about a salesperson, and a salesperson now has to say, why is my product that has this feature that my competitor doesn't have, why is it better than that competitor's product? And so we think of value from a really big perspective. Hey, I need to go solve this huge problem, to really small perspectives, such as in what smaller problems do I solve that my competitor doesn't solve?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, and to make it even more compelling, already you're not changing the channel, right? But also we're gonna, can't miss out. But also we're gonna make it even more compelling because we're gonna talk about AI and pricing, right? We're gonna talk both in terms of your role, how to use AI to help with understanding pricing and willingness to pay and value in your role as a product person, but also in your product, how do we price these new AI products and functionality that we're delivering? And so we're gonna reach into Mark's mind and get his thoughts on both of those. So it's gonna be great. All right, Mark, I was thinking we could start with pricing in your role, right? How can AI help us understand value we deliver and our audience's willingness to pay?
So I find this one of the most fascinating problems because I struggle with it still every day, right? I mean, I'm always thinking about how am I going to use AI differently today, or how can we help them? How can I help my clients get better, make better decisions using AI? So this is tough, right? There's no easy answer. But here's the thing I can tell you is that if you say to ChatGPT, first off, I want to take a quick step back. Let's talk about B2C versus B2B for a second.
Yes.
B2C has been using AI for many years. So we gather tons and tons of data. We run it through these AI models, and we're making predictions on what we think demand is going to look like based on weather, based on holidays, based on whatever it happens to be. Right? We're making these predictions, and so we've been doing that in a deep big data perspective for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very true.
All of a sudden, we get these LLMs, these GPTs that give us the ability to ask some really wacko random question, and GPT gives us an answer. Now, that answer isn't necessarily right,
no.
but it gives us an answer. And it's so incredible that we can do that now. And so when I think of using AI for pricing, I think of it much more on the B2B side. It's much more powerful on the B2B side. Now, that said, the things we're going to talk about, you could do these for B2C and have a better understanding of your marketplace. Because what I'm going to help you understand is how do your buyers make decisions? And that's, to me, the most important thing when I start thinking about how am I going to price my product.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's take a step back. I'm going to ask ChatGPT, how much should I price for my product? And it's going to give you an answer that's horrible, right?
$4.32.
Yeah, I mean, it may give you some good hints. It may talk about some things that are important and you should consider and think about. And
it'll talk about competitive pricing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about competitive pricing. We're going to talk about. It might even mention some words like market segments and things like that. But and these are important. There's no doubt. But the best way for you to go about figuring out how am I going to use AI to price is to say, what are those decisions that I need to understand so that I could set a price? And then ask AI about the underlying assumptions. And so ask AI about market segments. Now, just the same thing that I just said about pricing is true with market segments. You can't go ask AI, what are my market segments? Here's what I do sometimes is I'll ask AI, describe 10 different customers for this company, right? And then I'll say, you could ask it at that point in time, so tell me why are they different, right? What are the problems each one of these wants to solve? And so then after you've had that conversation with AI, it's already thought a little bit. Then you could ask it, break it into 3 market segments. And those answers aren't horrible. I got to tell you, they're pretty reasonable. They start to give you a path down, oh, this makes sense. Now you can go even further to say, hey, what features matter to each one of those customers? And so now I'm going to talk about a different concept called value tables. Value tables are the way I think customers perceive value. Whether they do it consciously or not, they say, hey, I have a problem. They buy a solution to the problem, and they achieve some result. In B2B, that result is a KPI. But everybody buys a product, everybody buys a feature because it solves a problem that they think they have. And so if you believe that, then what you could do is go through and say which features are most important to which customers. And those features, anybody who thinks it's really important, the reason they think it's important is because they have a problem that feature solves.
Yes. It all starts with problem, guys.
It always starts with problem. It always does.
Yeah.
And so I'll often do that. I'll say list a bunch of features. And now on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the most valuable, how much does each one of these customers value each one of these features? And then you can ask it to do a cluster analysis on its own results. Now, by the way, every time I do this, I go through and I read all of it because I want to know that it's not making stuff up.
You also often, and I do the same thing, you ask it to show its work, right? Either at the time or like, okay, tell me why you did that. And then it'll be like, oh, you're right. I did make some assumptions. You're like, hey, maybe don't do that. But it's an important part to do regularly through the process because it does force it to be like, or to explain its reasoning, which may make sense. Or it may be like, well, let me tell you the reasoning why that's not right.
Yes, exactly. And so I think what's going on behind the scenes, and so maybe a true AI expert could answer this for us, but what I think is going on behind the scenes is that AI is trying to save some of its own mental processing, right? It doesn't want to spend as much time thinking. And so sometimes it just guesses without doing deep thinking, and it gives us an answer. Because it's pretty common for me, well, I'll ask it a question and it gives me an answer that I just know is stupid. and I'll ask it something else. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. Sorry, I didn't mean that. And we'll move on. And so you have to read everything, right? I use AI as a brainstorming tool, as a first pass tool for a lot of things, but I don't ever believe that it's giving me the right answer. Never.
So when we think about using it for pricing, right? The things I need to know, what are my things I need to know to set a price? Great. Now I'm going to give you kind of test out some underlying assumptions about those things with AI, which again is a great exercise. Making sure I question it when it's not right. I know one of the things that you talk about sometime is like moving on price is not as important, but it's very important in you balancing that with getting like the perfect answer. Right? Like, I'm going to wait till I get the perfect answer or I'm not going to change my price. And you're like, well, like, let's move, let's test some things. Let's get some answers. So again, because AI is not perfect, there's a piece of this as well. Like, when do I feel like AI gave me enough insights into my assumptions and those kind of pieces?
Yes. Yeah, so I have a great piece of news for everybody.
Ooh.
I know. It is impossible to price perfectly, period. Ooh, that's got a lot of P's. It's impossible to price perfectly, period. Nice. Here's the scoop. The perfect price is I want to charge what my customer is willing to pay. That's it. That's the best price I could possibly do. But I can't read anybody's mind. So I have absolutely no idea how much someone's actually willing to pay. What we do is we start using processes, assumptions, algorithms to say, what do I think? How do I think this person's making a decision? And the best way I've figured out to say, this is how I believe someone's making a decision is by understanding, oh my God, I hate to say this word again, is by understanding what problems they're trying to solve and how important that problem is to them, how urgent it is, and even how well do I solve it relative to the competitive alternatives.
Yeah. And so really there you're thinking about all of the really important aspects of sort of breaking down willingness to pay, understanding what we're trying to solve as an organization, the competition sort of context, and using it as a thinking partner there. You alluded to the fact that AI in B2C has been used as, a big data type of solution there. Is there applications that you're seeing to add some of the quantitative aspects of pricing and pricing thinking to a B2B like market, right?
So let me say that I've seen some. I don't like any of them.
Okay,
right?
Tell me more.
So I wouldn't trust a number that ChatGPT gives me. I've seen it give me many numbers for things, and it's like, yeah, that might work for this situation, but not for that situation. And so what we want to do is keep asking it questions. And my request from everybody who's listening isn't go find the perfect price. It's just to get better tomorrow than you are today. That's all I ever ask for.
Yes.
Right. And so if you start thinking, oh, have I done price segmentation? Oh, do I have ability to raise my prices? Which customers would accept a price increase? Have I crafted the right product portfolio? Right? Am I using the right pricing model or pricing metric? So these are a bunch of decisions that we have to make. And the question is, can we just get a little better tomorrow?
Yeah.
And yes, we can, because you're never going to get that price perfectly. But the better you do, the more profit the company makes by far.
Right. And there's also, like, when we always talk about this, there's all kinds of ways to do research. You should do research, you should do pieces, but AI does help in that brainstorming model and getting pieces through and thinking them through for us to be far more intelligent than we were yesterday about how we think about pricing, willingness to pay, and how we understand how our buyers are valuing what we do.
Absolutely. So just for a second, let's talk about quantitative versus qualitative research, which I know we do in some of the Pragmatic courses. So in order for me to ask a quantitative question, I'm going to ask the question on a scale of 1 to 7, how much do you agree with the following sentence? Let's pick a CRM. I need more than 10,000 names for my CRM. Okay. So how did I know to ask that question?
Right. How do I know that that's a reasonable question to ask?
Yes. And so what ends up happening is when you start talking to AI and you say, hey, what do people consider when they're going to buy a CRM system? And even if you sat down and listed everything you could think of, it will think of more.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure. Right. And it shakes our biases too, right? Within an organization, you're very much thinking of through your lens, and it can help you expand that and think of maybe different solutions that they might be contemplating versus yours versus what you consider traditional competitors.
Yes. So as you know, I blog a lot, I write a lot. And so it's pretty common for me to say, oh, these are the 3 reasons why blah, blah, blah. And then I'll go ask ChatGPT and it says, oh, you didn't remember these 4 things. Oh, and 2 of them I hate, so I don't use. And 2 of them it's like, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And so I think the key to pricing, using AI for pricing, is to ask it really good questions, right? But not the question about price, but the question about all the things that you think drive a buyer's willingness to pay. That's the real key. And then let me take a quick step back, if I may. I created something called Pricing GPT. So if you have a subscription to ChatGPT, on the left-hand side, it lets you search for GPTs. You can search for Pricing GPT and you'll be able to subscribe to mine, I think. It's totally free. It doesn't matter. And so what you can do there is, first off, I've uploaded all of my blogs, all of my books. So you can ask you questions and it might actually answer it as though I would have answered it. Who knows for sure, right? It's a GPT. But one of the things I did there, which I found that works super well, is I've written a prompt inside the instructions. So if you were to type comma problem, so no spaces, just comma problem, space, and then write whatever problem statement you want to write that says, this is the problem that I think my customers have, that I think my customers are trying to solve. It will it'll provide you feedback on the problem statement you've written. And then it'll give you a few other problem statements that are, it'll rewrite it in one way. It'll make it more specific. It'll make it less specific. And it just gets you thinking about problems in a deeper way. And I think that's probably what's going to drive your ability to understand what your customers value, whether it's for pricing or picking your next new product. I don't care, right? How are we going to prioritize features?
And I have had the pleasure of using that, and I've used it to refine my problem statements, and it's fantastic. And the other piece about that is it also gives KPIs. It's like, hey, if that's your problem statement, here are some KPIs that would be related to if I solved that problem for someone, right? Which I also thought was a really good exercise because that starts to talk about value and how they would measure value and what areas they're looking for value. So it was an excellent thought partner. I've actually used it with the space, and the space works too. Just so we're clear. You can do comma space problem or just comma problem. But yes, it is a great tool. So, and actually, as you use it, I know Mark would also be interested in your feedback because I know Mark.
Oh, please.
Right. So if you're using it, please let him know. Okay. So that kind of talks a little bit about, no, you may not ask any of these GPTs what you should price your product at. There is no like magic 8 ball of that comes back for us for $7.11, but it is an excellent partner and it can be a good rigor for us to remember to think through the things that we need in order to understand willingness to pay and to start to really kind of quantify a little bit around value. So that's one piece of it. It's like, that's how do I use ChatGPT or any of the generative AIs in order to be better at my job in terms of pricing. The other thing that a lot of us are dealing with, of course, is pricing for new AI products. And certainly sometimes it's pricing for, startups that are AI native products. But I think for a lot of our listeners, enterprise organizations who have new AI features or new AI capabilities, the question is, in this competitive market, they're super shiny and sexy. How do I go about pricing these products?
Okay. I have some really good news and some really bad news.
Yes. Is it the same news?
Not quite, but close.
Okay.
Not quite, but close.
We'll start where you want to start. I'm going to start with the bad news, but I may miss it. Yeah.
I'm going for the good news first.
Oh, classic
Here's
Mark.
the good news. Absolutely nothing about the theory of pricing is different because of AI. Absolutely nothing. And so if you ask me, how do we price something? It's always, how much value is my customer going to get? How do they choose my product versus a competitor's product? And that's pricing. So we would always go back to those concepts regardless. So here's the bad news. The reason people are struggling with pricing AI today is because it's changing the way they deliver value to their customers. So as a company, you've built bicycles. Right? This is a horrible example, but we're going for it, right? You've built bicycles, and so you've always known I price for a bicycle. But all of a sudden, you have an AI module that allows you to custom design a bicycle and blah, 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 and you want to sell the ability to custom design. But all of a sudden, you're selling something different. You're not selling what you used to sell anymore. You're still delivering a ton of value, and it's not taking much time. And so the problem is your business model is changing, and yet you've never had to really dramatically change your pricing model before. And so that's where you are today. That's why this is such a hard problem, because your business model changes. And as your business model changes, your pricing model pretty much has to change. One pricing model that is almost disappearing because of AI is per user pricing. Right? So in the world of ChatGPT or the big LLMs, they're using per user pricing. There's no doubt. But if you're going to do an agent that performs a function, people aren't charging per user anymore because we're really trying to charge for the functionality, for what's the value we're delivering. And by the way, in the world of SaaS, take AI out of it, per user was typically not the best pricing metric anyway. We were just able to get away with it.
Right. It was simple and easy to understand. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the most closely tied to value.
Exactly.
Especially, I imagine in an agent, there's, at least whether we say it overtly or not, frequently an idea that if I deploy agents, I can either cut users, right, remove employees, or it lowers my need to do it, right? I may not cut anyone, but I won't have to hire the same amount. So again, if my product is meant to not increase your user base, then I don't want to charge per user, because it is not how it'd be the opposite of how I'm delivering value.
Right. And so if you think about, the example that everybody in pricing loves to use is Finn with Intercom. And these guys have done a phenomenal job, because what they do is they field customer support calls using AI to field customer support calls. And if they can get all the way to a resolution without ever talking to a real human, then they charge a certain price for the resolution. Right? Now, how do you charge per user on that?
Right.
Right? Because there's no user. Unless maybe it's the admin person who's setting it up or the IT person who's setting it up. But there is no user. And as we see more and more of this AI functionality coming out, we see that, hey, user-based pricing is probably not the right answer. So now we're all struggling to say, okay, what's the right answer? How do we do this? And it's not easy, right? It's never been easy.
Right,
but it's not easy today. You hear a lot more of people talking about outcome-based pricing. So outcome-based pricing is, it's what I just talked about with Finn and Intercom. An outcome is we had a customer resolution without a person talking to them, right? A customer resolution is a really good outcome. And so you could measure outcomes or KPIs and say, look, we charge for the outcome. Now, not every agent, not every AI application has the ability to charge for outcomes. And so then we think about something besides an outcome. And it gets hard. You've probably all seen us charge for tokens, right?
Yes.
I hate this. Oh my God, I hate this.
I was just doing this with my daughter. She was like, but I only get 100,000 tokens. I'm like, what is a token? What does it get me? Why is that too? That seems like a lot. Why is this not enough? What is happening? Yes.
Yeah. And so I hate tokens for two reasons. Number one, we as buyers or consumers have no idea what it actually means. It turns out we could figure it out with a lot of effort, start to make estimates. But number two, the reason companies use tokens is because they're just trying to cover their costs. It is cost plus pricing. That's what it is. It has absolutely nothing to do with value we deliver to our customers.
Yep.
Now, when you're selling an LLM, when you're selling a platform, so you think of ChatGPT or Grok or any of these Claude, they're platforms, and you can do almost anything with it, and it's really, really hard to price for value. And what typically happens with these large platforms is when there's competition, we drive down to costs. And so it almost makes sense for them to be charging by the token. Right? Almost makes sense. But if you're in business and you're not building an LLM, right? If you're not the one that's driving the platform, then try not to use tokens.
Right. What you're doing is a solution, not a platform, or a product, not a platform.
Right. You're trying to build a product or a solution, not a platform. Absolutely. And so now start thinking about things like, I'm going to charge per query. I'm going to charge per API call. I'm going to charge for the amount of data that you're using or storing or accessing. I'm going to charge for data stored. Let's see. Oh, how many connections do I have to my system? Right?
So still feel like activities or inputs versus outcomes.
Well, and so let's talk about pricing of a SaaS product, non-AI based SaaS product again for a second. If I have the ability to charge on outcomes, I'm going to do that.
Okay. All right. So this is like, if you can't do that, think this.
But if you can't do that, then you've got to do something else. And what I always look for whenever I'm trying to find a pricing metric or trying to find the right pricing metrics for a client is we say, how is it that our customers get value from our products? And then we say, what are the metrics? What are the things that happen inside the software that we could track and measure? And which ones of those things are highly correlated with the value our customers get? And so those make really good pricing metrics, if we can do that. Now, by the way, here's the perfect company for pricing metrics. I mean, Intercom's pretty good with Fin, there's no doubt. But PayPal is perfect because they charge you 2% of the revenue you get. I cannot wait until I have to pay PayPal $1 million.
That's interesting because credit cards generally work that way, right? So if you're a merchant and you take credit cards, and there is a point when you're all excited, and then as you do better, it's a point where you're really frustrated because the number gets big and you forget the value and access, right? It's so sort of ubiquitous, but you forget that, like, if you walk into a store right now, which happens sometimes on the East Coast, and they don't take credit cards, you just like, you pause. You're like, where's there an ATM? Like, how do I do this? But you know what I mean? Like, you do, yeah. But certainly when you're started, you're like, yes, because it feels a little bit like you're in it with them. We succeed when you succeed, which is always a good place to be.
Yep. And what's great about that from a PayPal perspective, forget the fact that the vendor has to pay it. And, I don't want to pay 2% to PayPal or anybody, right? I'd rather not do that. On the other hand, when I think about PayPal's pricing metric, what I think about is I am always striving to grow my revenue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's my number one goal is how do I grow my revenue? And that's 100% aligned with the way PayPal charges me.
Yep.
right?
Yes. One of the other things I think is kind of interesting when you think about, we do not advocate for cost plus pricing, right? But there is a often sort of both from the buyer and the builder, like this idea of effort tied to value, which is basically cost plus pricing in a SaaS environment or anywhere else, right? So effort equals value. So even in your bike example, you had said, so you change your business model, even if it doesn't take you a lot of time, right? There's like a little bit of this new AI functionality may seem easy to you once you've built it, right? Like it's not hard for us to manage and use. And so because it's not hard to do, we wouldn't charge a lot for it, right? Conversely, there's some belief among buyers that certain products like maybe not SaaS, but like services, like, well, you should probably charge me less than you used to because I know that you're using, generative AI to help with these things. So there is a little bit of sort of a emotional tug on how we price AI that I think is interesting.
Yeah, and I think any service provider who has been charging by the hour is now about to be hurt pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're making yourself more efficient, which means you make less money.
Which, again, never was based on value, so not how you advocate. But this is one of the reasons, right? Like, because you can do it more efficiently does not change the value you deliver.
Yep.
But if you always talk time, then they're going to wonder why you are not using tools to make yourself more effective.
Yes. And so we should always be pricing based on value if we possibly can, always. One of the problems that comes up is that we always want to match, at least not abuse, our buyers' expectations. And so our buyers' expectations may be, hey, with AI, this should cost less. This should take less time. This should be, right? And our job has to be explaining value to our customers and why it's worth it to them to pay for it. But here's what ends up happening is let's just talk about a service provider, and we'll do a lawyer for a second, right? Because we can all hate lawyers. It's fine.
Sorry, Isabel.
Yeah. And so a lawyer used to charge by the hour, and it would take them 100 hours to do some project, and they make a ton of money. And if they were using AI, they could probably do that same project in 10 hours. Okay, great. So are they still going to charge for the 100 hours? Let's say that they do. And now another lawyer comes along and says, I don't know why they're charging you for 100 hours. I can do this for 1/10 the price. I'll just take it on a flat fee. And that person is using AI. And so what ends up happening, even in the service world, even though we're selling value, is that the tools drop our costs. So you could think of a price that we come to an agreement on is a combination between how much is my buyer willing to pay and how much am I or my competitors willing to sell it for, right? And so if it takes me 100 hours, I'm not willing to sell it for 10% of that normal price. But if I can do it in 10 hours, then I'm willing to sell it for 10% of that normal price. And so we end up seeing the cost because of competition driving pricing down. Even in these service providers that are going to sell based on value.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because there is still, but particularly, a year and a half, a huge land rush to be able to say, I have AI in my product, right? That I've got this AI feature that there was such a rush to release. There was very little charging for it up front, right? It was just like, I want to be the first to say I have this, so I seem like I'm on the thing and you don't have to worry about it. And so some of those organizations then are struggling with, well, I didn't charge for it. How do I charge? Like, at what point am I saying that it has changed the value? So I think that's another interesting piece that you don't always see with new features and functionality, that there was such a drive to be first, and very little effort to charge for it up front, because everyone was seeing this new world and like, oh, ChatGPT is free and but now you've made the bed and you want to step back and be like, okay, I don't want to necessarily just talk about we have AI. Again, part of this is communication. It's not that we now have AI. It is that now our product solves this problem that it didn't before.
Yeah, let me say that again in a slightly different way. Nobody cares that you have AI. Absolutely nobody.
Right. I mean, your board might.
Well, okay, yeah, the board might. But what they care about is that you are solving their problems for them, and that is it.
Yes.
Right? Now, however you do it is up to you. And by the way, it's probably pretty smart to use AI if you can to be more effective and more efficient. But no one cares that you're using AI.
Yeah, they were, and yes, there was a first to market, coolness factor, but that we're past that now. Now everybody is. So tell me why it matters to me.
Yep, exactly. And so I think what we're seeing, and we're going to see this a lot, is that there are companies that are coming out today building AI agents, AI products. They're being very successful, making a lot of money. But what'll end up happening, and in fact, we see it today, is that because you can build an AI agent, I can build an AI agent.
Yeah.
And so it's going to start driving pricing down towards costs again. Right? It's going to be really challenging to figure out how do I truly compete because we're all doing the same thing. Or once you've proven there's a market for this type of agent, I can go build a different agent. And
yeah, I think it's one of the reasons, though, that when we talk about understanding both problems and segments is so important, right? Like, yes, ChatGPT, Claude, all of them, they're very general. Like you said, they're platforms, so anybody can do it on there. When I combine the technology with a deep understanding of a specific space or problem, that's when it starts to be value that is more difficult to replicate and where it starts to feel very targeted and specific, right?
Yep. No, I agree with that 100%. And we're back to that thing. Can you ask ChatGPT, how much should I charge? Right? And the answer is no. But I could ask it, and I wouldn't ask it that question, right? But I could ask it a whole bunch of questions to get to that point only because I have this level of expertise to do that. And that's what I think everybody wants to try to achieve is where's your expertise and how are you going to use ChatGPT to expand on your expertise?
Yes. And it's true, right? What I can get the generative AI to do for me is different because what I am is feeding it my expertise and continuing to refine it and correct it in a different way than you are, and vice versa, right? Like it would not give me nearly as interesting a price thinking as you would, right? Because I'm not asking it the right questions. I'm not providing it some of the, again, you're correcting it along the way, just like you would an employee who's new to the space, right? You're like, that's interesting. You're really smart, right? But let me help you understand. It's a little bit in that same way. You've got to teach it and then watch it forget it all in very frustrating ways.
Yeah, I heard somebody once say that AI is like an intern. I think what's better is AI is like having 1,000 interns, right? So you get a whole bunch of different ideas, but you got to figure out which ones are good.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's like mass opportunity and mass chaos all at once. So so just reflecting back, what we talk about pricing, AI functionality or products, the fundamentals of what makes good pricing doesn't change. It is about willingness to pay. It is about understanding the value you deliver and making sure you communicate it correctly. It is understanding different segments and who is more or less price sensitive and more or less, the problem is bigger and more urgent for. That being said, there are some emotional pulls, right? In terms of people's belief that things should be faster or not. And there are maybe the biggest change that you talked about is pricing metric, right? That because it changes some of the way things are scaled and used, that some of the traditional pricing metrics, particularly for SaaS, where user is easy, is something that needs to be really looked at because we're solving it differently. Are there other things like that where like fundamentally what makes good pricing is the same, but here are some nuances or things to consider with AI products?
Yeah, I think the pricing metric is by far the biggest problem that we see right now with pricing AI products. The other thing that product managers have to face, and we as pricers get the repercussions of these decisions, and that is how am I going to build AI into my products? Mm-hmm. Right. So you already mentioned AI native, right? But we could also have AI accessories or AI options that we built on top, or
Yep.
we may have built AI into our better package, but not our good package, right? And so we have to start thinking, how do we want to package AI into the products that we end up offering? And just like anything, the best way to do this is to start thinking, how would I normally define a product portfolio? Forget that it's AI or not AI. And who is it that's going to buy my good package? Who's going to buy my better package? Who's going to buy my best package? What problems could I solve with an add-on or an option that I wasn't going to solve before? Who cares? So it's the exact same decisions that we would always make.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that now we've been handed this new magic tool, and we actually have to make faster decisions that are probably a little bit different than we've ever made before.
Yeah. The other thing I was doing a podcast the other day. It was super interesting as we were talking about not only like the other interesting thing from a product perspective, and I'd be interested in how this affects pricing, is I can't think of a time I was going to say there's never been a time, but I always hate saying never because someone's going to be like, Rebecca, do you remember? No, but like the speed at which the models are improving at the same time, at the speed of which they're getting less expensive. Right? Like both of these things are true. It means when we are designing solutions, we have to be thinking further than what is available today. And I would think that this has pricing implications as well that I would be interested in you thinking about. Like there's just how quickly they're improving, how quickly the cost is going down, making sure we don't just base everything on what exists today because it will be behind the times tomorrow. How do we set up pricing that allows for that?
Yeah. Well, I think step number one is forget the cost side.
Right.
Now,
yes.
Right.
Oh, I said the word cost in front of Mark.
I know. But I mean, it turns out that when you build a business, you have to cover your costs.
Yes.
I mean, otherwise it's tough to be in business.
It's a bad business. Yeah.
Right. But especially when costs are dropping dramatically, it is totally okay to say, yeah, this is not profitable today, but it's going to be profitable a year from now.
Valid.
Right.
Yep.
And so if we're building a native AI app, odds are really good the cost of producing that is going to go down dramatically. And so I wouldn't worry too much about the costs at this point in time. I'd worry much more about how am I delivering value? How am I going to build something that's differentiated and protectable? So when it comes to pricing for the future, I don't think that's feasible. We have a hard enough time selling what we have today.
Yeah, fair.
Because my job is, let's pretend like I'm a salesperson for a second. My job is to convince you that when you give me money, you're going to get a lot more value than you paid me in money. And it's really tough for me to say, pay me a lot today because I'm going to give you a lot of value tomorrow. Now, I might be able to use that to say, hey, look at how rapidly we're improving and innovating. And so you want to be on our bandwagon because we're going to continue to grow and we're going to have this roadmap. So maybe that's okay. But I think we don't know what the future holds enough to say, look, I'm going to price for the fact that I'm going to have rapid improvement.
I mean, I do think it's another reason, of which I know you have many, why we should set expectations with our market for a regular price change, right? That setting up that mechanism, whether it's, in contracts if you have longer B2B ones, but just a sort of annual or whatever the right cadence is review of pricing, because you will want to be able to respond to some of these, and you don't want to, create an environment where being responsive and breaks you. Yeah.
Yep. So let's just talk about pricing innovation for just a brief moment, if that's okay.
Yeah.
As you build, and specifically for software type products, as you innovate, you have two choices. You have lots of choices. You can not get paid for it. That's not a good choice from my perspective, right?
Yes.
So you can add it into your current product and then raise your prices in a year. Or you can add it into a different product, call it an upgrade, call it a better or best product, and then sell upsells, right? Those are the two big choices you have as you start building or innovating for your features and your products. I think every software company should be raising prices every year.
Yeah.
If you are not, you are missing out dramatically because no matter what, you're adding value to your base products. But you do want to think heavily about, well, is this something that's so unique? It's actually solving a very different problem for a very different subset of customers. And maybe we build it into a different feature instead of putting it into our base products, because then we can get that subset of customers to pay us a lot more money that we couldn't get most of our customers to pay us for. And so we want to think about those innovations as we're building them. How are we going to price for them? And if you're not putting them into a new feature or a new product to sell, then you better be having annual price increases.
That's a really good framework you gave, sort of like an innovation, which a lot of these AI products are. There's like, you could not get paid for it. Please stop doing that. Then there's the like, is it unique? Does it solve a different problem? Does it solve a problem, but only for a smaller segment of your audience? Then you might think of it as an add-on and charge for it discreetly upfront now. Or is it an improvement that serves, say, the overall solution, overall audience, and everyone should have it, in which case you must communicate that value and then capture that value in a regular increase.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. No. And I think that you have to have that mechanism in place so you can keep adding value and not be seeing the return.
Yep. And too many companies add value without raising prices.
Yes. This is what keeps Mark up at night, just so you're all very clear. These are the things where he's like, hello. Which means that if I was like a vendor of Mark's, I'd be like, well, obviously I'm raising my prices like, every 6 months, because think of the value.
Every year.
You're like, back off.
and you have no idea how much I hate Intuit, who raises my price every year for QuickBooks every year. But it's like, if they didn't, I'd almost be upset with them.
Right? You'd be like, oh, yes. And often, look, it's like that first time it happens. We all know this story is boring because it's too well known, but like Netflix, the first time they raised their price, you were like, oh, this is ridiculous. And now they raise it all the time. You're like, I'm okay, right? Postage stamps were 25 cents forever, kids. And then once they went above 25 cents, now they raise them like regularly. I don't even know what they are anymore because they just stay forever on them. They were tired of telling you how much they were.
Okay, to be fair, Netflix totally messed up their first price increase. Totally messed up. It was a huge, huge jump in price. And,
it was percentage-wise, but it was like $4 a month, right? But percentage-wise, I think it went from 5 to 9, didn't it?
I think it was slightly different than that. I don't remember for sure, but it was something like that from a percentage perspective.
Yeah. Percentage-wise, it was a huge jump.
But here's what you have to know is that buyers think in terms of percentages.
Yes.
We don't know that we do that, but we do that.
It's true, right? Because if someone's like, I raised Intuit raised it $4, you'd be like, okay, seems fair. Yeah. But percentage-wise, you're like, that's insane.
So it's actually a law. It's called the Weber-Fechner law.
Oh, Weber-Fechner.
I know. It's Weber-Fechner, if you want to Google that. But let me give you a quick example. The Weber-Fechner law says the following, or here's the example of it. Let's imagine for a second that you're going to buy something that normally sells for $20, and it's $10 off if you're willing to drive across town to go get it. And you're like, yeah, okay, I'll drive across town for that. What if you're going to buy something that normally sells for $200 and it's $10 off if you drive across town to get it?
Right. Yeah. No. It's true.
In either case, you're driving across town for $10.
Right.
In one way, it feels like the right answer, and the other way, it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get that. Interesting. All right, Mark, we've talked about lots of different things about AI and pricing. Is there anything I forgot to ask you? You're like, Rebecca, you missed such a good question.
I have no idea.
So the answer is no. You were amazing, Rebecca. Oh, thanks, Mark.
Oh, that's right. You were fabulous. As always.
Oh, why, thank you. All right. Then I will ask you the standard question, right? If you were going to have listeners do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would it be?
Let's say I have to pick one from each side just because it's the way I think.
Right. And be balanced.
So on the pricing of AI side, I would say think really hard about your pricing metrics right now. So as you start to release products, that's the biggest problem that companies are having as you release AI products. So think and do exercises on the pricing metric. When it comes to using AI to help you with your pricing, go back to customer problem. Go to pricing GPT and use comma problem, and it will start getting you thinking about problems the way your customers think about problems. So I think that's a great suggestion, because what you really have to do is understand value from many, many different customers' perspectives.
And again, having played around with it, it is very much in line with what we teach about market problems, right? And what makes a good market problem. So as you're doing work in general on your market problems and really making sure that you've thought through, like, are these urgent, pervasive, are they measurable, all of those things, it is a great sounding board.
Can I want to share a quick story, if I may.
Oh, please.
Before we close. So I've been in pricing for 30 years. And I became a Pragmatic instructor, probably 10 years ago now, somewhere in that ballpark, maybe a little bit longer than
11.
that. 11 years ago. Okay, got it. And so when I became a Pragmatic instructor, you guys taught me the importance of problems, right? So it's always market problems, market problems, market problems. So when I retired from Pragmatic, it's like, well, what am I going to go do now? And I started figuring out, what is it that I really know? And what is it that I really believe? And this concept of problems ties in with pricing so incredibly well. It truly shapes the way I think about everything nowadays.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to understand how I knew pricing before I knew problems. It is so ingrained in the way we should be thinking about pricing.
Well, and it's interesting because you talk a lot about value and how we define value and what does value mean. And like it's a big debate among pricing experts if you ever want to fall down a big rabbit hole. But part of value, I think for you is the value is the problems that I'm solving and the result that it gives. And it's a very clean, crisp, but it is, it agree. And so it is a lovely tool that you should play with. So as always, Mark, it is delightful to have you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Rebecca. It is always fun to be here.
Excellent. All right. That does it for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.